This season of the Cold Podcast includes descriptions of rape, sexual assault, murder, and domestic violence. Please, take care in listening.
It's now November 25th, 1985 at 8 p.m. This is the case of Sheree Warren. She disappeared from Salt Lake City October 2nd, 1985, approximately 6:30 p.m. from the Utah Employees Credit Union.
Nearly 2 months had passed since the disappearance of Sheree Warren. Her boyfriend, Cary Hartmann, sat down with a tape recorder.
This is all the information I can possibly remember. If I don't get it all today, I'll put it together piece by piece. There's so much that's happened for almost 8 weeks now. Kind of hard to remember every bit of it.
Cary recorded the tape for a guy named Michael Neumeier, a private investigator. I've not been able to find the original, but Neumeier made a transcript of it, so you're hearing Cary's words read by a voice actor.
Mike, to be frank with you, I don't see anything short of a miracle, other than turning up possibly the remains, if that's the case, or her walking in the door.
Again, Cary recorded this for a PI, not Roy Police Detective Jack Bell.
Not sure why Cary did that.
Jack never received the tape. Like me, he's only ever seen the 16-page, spiral-bound transcript.
Cary brought it in, and it was in a book form. It was all typed up. One of those that you can bind yourself. Neumeier, terrible speller.
Michael Neumeier had a lot in common with Cary Hartmann. Neumeier had served in the Navy, and after getting out, had taken a job with the Ogden Police Department.
But he didn't last too long. He come out here to Roy and didn't last too long here either. So he started his own private detective business or whatever.
Cary had met Neumeier at the Nice Corporation call center, where they were both moonlighting in the fall of '85. They became fast friends, and the topic of Sheree came up in conversation. Neumeier told Cary he had worked a homicide case in the past. He volunteered to look into Sheree's disappearance. Cary made handwritten notes about this conversation, and I have copies. They say, quote, Neumeier, private dick, sort of. Wants to help. All details needed. Has some good leads. Wants to remain underground for now. So that's why Cary recorded the tape, to tell his version of the story to Michael Neumeier.
Mike, I've put together everything that I can think of up to date. It's just my opinion, and I'm just giving you what you asked for, as much information as I could.
Cary offered few solid details about his relationship with Sheree. He didn't say how they'd met or talk about any of her interests or aspirations. He described himself simply as her lover.
I took her into my folks' home and down to my sister's place in Salt Lake. Pretty soon, she was a member of the family. Before anyone knew it, she was carrying the conversation and doing the dishes. A very exceptional young woman.
Huh. A man falling in love with a woman after she cleans his dishes. Where have I heard that before? A moment ago, I mentioned Cary's notes about Sheree's disappearance. There's another page where he wrote down the titles of 2 songs. The first was Cherish by Kool and the Gang. Its chorus repeats the lines, Cherish the love we have, we should cherish the life we live.
Now, this is the kind of lady that would come home after work and she'd be lying here on the couch in my bathrobe with some candles around the room, the music on, and a drink waiting. She was a very affectionate, giving, generous, wonderful lady.
Well, at the time, he was madly in love, supposedly, and she'd wait for him to get home from work and have candles lit and wine poured and all this hoopla, bullshit. But if she had some problems there with Cary, I hadn't found anybody that she had shared them with. Mm-hmm.
The second song, Come Back and Stay by Paul Young, includes the lyrics, Since you've been gone, opened my eyes and I realize what we had together. Will you ever return?
I know at the time that I was going with Sheree, there was no one else in her life. She was very satisfied and extremely happy. I say that because of our relationship. It was exceptional.
This is Cold, Season 3, Episode 3, Cherish the Love. From KSL Podcasts, I'm Dave Cawley. Cary Hartmann's statement to private investigator Michael Neumeier included a new version of his account of the night Sheree Warren disappeared.
I was at home, which is at 697th Ogden, Utah. The phone rang. It was 4:30 p.m.
Cary said he had stopped by his apartment after finishing work at Weber State College for the day, before heading to his second job.
It was Sheree. The conversation went something like this. She said, "What are you going to do after work?" I work part-time out at Nice Corporation. I said, "Well, I'm going to meet Dave Moore."
Cary and Dave were friends. They had served together in the Ogden Police Reserve Corps. Cary called Dave his best friend. He said he had told Sheree he and Dave planned to rendezvous at a bar called Sebastian's, next to the sewing machine repair shop Dave owned, at around 9 p.m. They'd have 2 drinks, then call it quits.
She was kind of joking. I guess that'll be about 4 in the morning. And I said, no. I said, I'm going to have 2 drinks, and I was coming right home. At this point in time, that little lady meant everything in the entire world to me. Drinking all night with the boys just wasn't what it was cracked up to be, and when I said 2 drinks and I was coming home, that's what I meant. She said, "That's wonderful." She said, "I'll be waiting for you at home." And that's the last word I ever heard from her.
Cary said he had run a little late getting to Sebastian's that night, arriving just after 9. He said Dave Moore was already there waiting for him.
We talked, had a couple of drinks. I decided at that time it would be a lot nicer to have Sheree down there. I called her at my home, no answer. When the phone rang and she didn't answer, I knew at that moment something was wrong. I called Sheree's mother's house. This was approximately 10:30-ish. She said, "She's not here. Isn't she with you?" That confirmed that I knew at that moment something was wrong, and drastically wrong. That's how well I know the lady.
Dave Moore told us in the last episode he remembered going to the bar with Cary at 6, not 9. So again, Cary's story here is out of sync. And it's not just off from what Dave said. It doesn't line up with what Cary had himself told Detective Jack Bell the day after Sheree disappeared. Back then, he had said he had found out Sheree was missing the next morning from Sheree's mom. But Sheree's mom, Mary Sorensen, told police she had received 2 calls from Cary the night of. So here in this statement, Cary shifted his story to bring it into alignment with Mary's.
I keep calling. I called all night. I came home approximately 10:30, 11, called her mom, called girlfriends. Nothing.
Sheree had told her mom on the day of her disappearance she had planned to pick up her son from her estranged husband, Chuck, after work. She had then intended to bring her son home and have dinner at her parents' house. But in this version of Cary's story, he said Sheree had instead planned to meet up with him, leaving her son with Chuck that night through the following day.
What they do is Chuck has privileges as far as the son goes on Wednesdays and Thursdays. Works out real well for her. Picks him up on Wednesday and delivers him Thursday night.
Sheree was supposed to be at work early the next morning, 40 miles south of home in Salt Lake City.
Even if our relationship wasn't good, and it was absolutely excellent, she had a brand new job, a big promotion. She would not leave her son and just take off.
Ditching her son to stay out late on a weeknight with Cary, potentially blowing her new promotion, would have been out of character for Sheree.
This is not the type of lady that would not show up. If she was going to be a minute late, she would call. If she was going to be a half a minute late, she would call.
Cary said after calling Sheree's mom, he had dialed Roy City Police Dispatch to report her missing.
Dispatch then gave the report to, I believe, Jack Bell, who now has the case. Obviously, because of the circumstances, there was no incriminating evidence of foul play to date.
I didn't put my finger on it right away, but later on, I felt like he handpicked me to report it to because he knew me.
Jack now believes in retrospect, Cary had pushed him toward possible persons of interest.
He pushed away from himself whichever which way.
They included a credit union patron.
There is a man who came into the credit union and asked Sheree for a date. She went and had a drink with him at Sebastian's. He's a real weirdo. He bugged her a lot, called her, wouldn't leave her alone.
As well as a guy Sheree had briefly dated after separating from her husband, before dating Cary.
I know this guy was involved in some drugs. To what extent, I don't know. I know it was strong enough and often enough that it turned Sheree off, and she told him to hit the road.
But Cary took a more pointed approach in talking about the last man known to have seen Sheree alive.
I think we need to look at this Richard Moss.
You heard from Richard Moss in the last episode. He was the branch manager Sheree had been training on the credit union's computer system.
Well, Mr. Richard Moss of Richfield was working with Sheree those 2-day periods. She worked close enough with this guy, she went to lunch with him. They did go in Mr. Richard Moss's car the first day. Now, this is a point that I must bring up. When asked, Richard Moss said, well, Sheree was driving a maroon 1984 Toyota. Point being, no one in that entire credit union knew what type of car she was driving. None of us knew, but yet this Richard Moss knew all of a sudden. How did he know that when they went to lunch in Mr. Moss's car? Kind of strange.
Cary was well aware his old high school acquaintance Jack Bell had already interviewed Richard Moss over the phone.
Richard Moss told Detective Jack Bell, other people, Sheree told him, see you tomorrow. I'm going to Wagstaff, pick up my husband. He needs to get his car repaired and give him a ride home. Now, why would she say that if Chuck got through to her with a phone call and canceled the appointment?
Why, indeed?
Unless she was just trying to brush him off, which is possible, I don't know.
This is one of the strange things that old Chuck has pulled.
But Cary did everything he could do to promote Chuck Warren as being the guilty party in her disappearance.
Even if the guy didn't do it, I pray to God he didn't do it.
Jack had seen Chuck Warren as his prime suspect since the beginning, thanks in part to information provided by Cary. Cary used innuendo.
They were having some problems with agreeing on child support. Court decided, I believe, that it would be $252. That's based on Chuck's earnings per year. Of course, he makes pretty good money.
And Cary used hearsay.
Seems a bit strange Chuck would drive an '84 $13,000 Supra to Wagstaff Toyota on the whim of getting it repaired and no one ever seeing either of them. Seems very strange.
So Cary could paint a picture using a palette of circumstantial colors.
Oh, and by the way, as of this moment, that '84 Supra is on a lot for sale. Chuck's pleading, the poor boy, the poor situation, I can't afford this, I can't afford that. I know for a fact the man just took out a $22,000 or $23,000 second mortgage on his home. He did pay off that Supra.
Cary said a dispute over child support had stalled Sheree's divorce.
For some reason, Chuck come up with a figure of $181 and was paying that fairly regularly to Sheree at the point that she disappeared. He did owe her $500. She had him served again to try and straighten out this money matter. The man is very, very, very money hungry. He's a money person. That's all he thinks about, supposedly.
By Cary's account, money served as motive for Chuck Warren to kill Sheree.
According to Sheree, and I believe her, if she said the sun wasn't going to come up, I'd take bets. Chuck came into the credit union maybe a week or maybe 2 weeks before she disappeared. The credit union had members as well as staff. He told her in so many words, I believe they were very pointed words. I'm going to kill you. I will get even for you for this.
We've heard this story a couple of times now, from Cary, from Sheree's friend Pam Volk, and from the last person known to have seen Sheree alive, Richard Moss. But this retelling of Cary's version included a new detail.
He flashed a gun, at least at Sheree. I blame this on her. She didn't report it to the police, any of this. I tried to get her to. She wouldn't do it. She wanted to keep things status quo.
Again, Cary had told this story to Detective Jack Bell about a week after Sheree disappeared, but there's no mention of a gun in Jack's notes of that conversation.
That wasn't told to me.
Okay.
Chuck coming in with a gun in his waistband. That was told to Mike Neumeier. And there's another character.
Jack's notes show Sheree's boss confirmed Chuck and Sheree had been in some sort of confrontation at the credit union branch in Ogden a week or so before Sheree disappeared. So Cary's story contained at least a kernel of truth. But I've talked to Sheree's former boss myself. She didn't remember seeing or hearing about a gun.
I was told by ladies that work at the credit union with Sheree, they said that Chuck was very volatile. He was there, pleasant to talk to, but yet he would explode upon getting irritated, mad. Strange personality. Done a lot of strange things.
Chuck Warren flashing a gun in a crowded credit union would have been more than strange. Any teller who saw it would have likely hit the hold-up alarm. But maybe Sheree's the only person who saw it, and maybe Cary's the only person with whom she shared that detail. Or maybe Cary decided to embellish the story, to push more suspicion onto Chuck Warren.
My own opinion, I think Chuck knows something about it. Involved? To what degree, I can't say. I think he knows something about it, definitely.
Cary's statement was a masterclass in the not-so-subtle art of casting aspersions.
Chuck took off work, supposedly depressed and ill the day after Sheree was missing. Supposedly went home, put all his vehicles in his garage, walked to the Ogden City Mall. That computes to be a 60-block round trip. That's one heck of a walk. This man is not a physical specimen. He's not a jogger. He's not an athlete. He's not an average skier. Runner? He's not. This is completely out of character for him, this man.
The only positive thing Cary had to say about Chuck involved his signing the paperwork that had allowed police to search Sheree's car after it had turned up in Las Vegas.
The only thing Chuck has done to date is to lend a hand whatsoever. He did sign a consent search. We were hoping we'd find something incriminating in the car. That was not the case.
Cary summarized what Las Vegas Metro Police had found in the car. He mentioned the fingerprints they had lifted from the driver door window.
They haven't confirmed whatsoever whose prints they are. Hopefully, Las Vegas will send prints up to us. We'll be able to make a matchup of those.
Cary used words like us and we, as if he was himself a police detective working the case. He had clearly learned about the details of the car from Detective Jack Bell. But Jack was beginning to regret how open he had been in sharing information with Cary.
To me, it was more Cary's manipulations. More of the same thing about handpicking me to take the original report from him because we knew each other in high school, basically.
Cary said he had at first thought Sheree's car might surface in the mountains east of Ogden.
We were kind of of the opinion, Jack Bell and myself, that the car was dumped in Causey, Pineview, Lost Creek, somewhere deep. Something you can get a car into quickly.
You got two reservoirs up there that are deep, Causey and Lost Creek on the other side.
The name Causey might sound familiar. It came up a couple of times in episode 1. Causey Reservoir sits near the campground where Cary Hartmann tried to lure Heidi Posning at the start of our story. And Causey's near where Cary's friend, Brent Morgan, the taxidermist, had his wedding a year before Sheree disappeared. So Cary knew the Causey area well. But where is Causey in relation to Lost Creek Reservoir? Picture a percent sign, like on a keyboard. A small circle in the upper left, a diagonal slash, and another circle in the bottom right. The top left circle would be Causey. The bottom right circle, Lost Creek. The slash between them is a mountain. In his statement to private investigator Michael Neumeier, Cary Hartmann said he had checked both Causey and Lost Creek for Sheree Warren's car.
There wasn't a sign of any vehicle going down. Dragging rocks. They would have to do some skidding. Nothing.
Cary knew the area well. He had deer hunted in the hills around Lost Creek for years. He had even taken Sheree to Lost Creek earlier that summer.
Sheree and I, my two boys, went fishing. Had a picnic up at Lost Creek Reservoir up near Croydon by the cement plant just past Devil's Slide. Absolute fantastic, wonderful day. Couldn't have been better. Sheree did everything. She put together the lunch, fried chicken. She bought the beer, pop. She put it all together. She had her dad running around town getting ice for it. She wouldn't let me do a thing. This is the kind of generous lady she was.
Not lady she is, but lady she was. Cary referred to Sheree in the past tense throughout this statement, even though she had only been gone about a month and a half. Police still believed she might yet be alive. Cary said he had again searched for Sheree's car at Lost Creek himself while up there for the deer hunt.
I took my three-wheeler and I scoured that thing. There wasn't a part of that reservoir that I could get to, that a car could get to, that I didn't check and double-check. Obviously not in there. I felt all along that the car was not in the state. The reason being, we had 200,000 deer hunters. We had at least that many pheasant hunters there, and no one saw a thing. Well, it turned out the car was in Vegas.
Cary had a theory about how Sheree's car made it to Vegas.
I'm of the opinion the lady has gotten in real trouble and she's not with us anymore. She's been dumped. She's in Vegas, and someone made Vegas their getaway and used their car to do it. It had been there a long time, Mike. Jack Bell's opinion, it had been there possibly right off the bat. It went straight from Salt Lake to Vegas. Why someone didn't spot it, I'll never be able to answer.
In the last episode, we heard how Cary had told Detective Jack Bell of a coworker of his who had had a dream about Sheree. Cary repeated the story here to private investigator Michael Neumeier.
You can take this for what you want, Mike. This man is extremely credible. This gentleman told me that 3 or 4 times in his life he's woke up in the middle of the night with a startling, sinking feeling, a dream. Something comes to him in the middle of the night. He told me, and he was writing this down when he was telling me, Cary, I see Sheree in the company of a big man, approximately 6'2" or 3", 220 pounds, blonde, wide-set eyes, around Big Rock Candy Mountain down here around Beaver, Utah.
Beaver is a small town that sits on Interstate 15, almost exactly halfway between Salt Lake City, Utah, and Las Vegas, Nevada. Big Rock Candy Mountain is about 50 miles away from Beaver, near Richfield, where Richard Moss lived. Again, Richard was the tall, broad credit union manager Sheree had been training the day she disappeared. Cary's retelling of his coworker's dream continued.
He even described another person being there as being tall, thin, real dark hair, wearing a black jacket. Sheree is tall, fairly thin.
Sheree stood 5'5", and that's not tall. But pay attention to this bit about the jacket.
She has dark hair, and she has my black jacket on. He even described this man as stopping at a convenience store, buying a donut or two, buying some gas.
Cary had previously told Detective Jack Bell Sheree had left for work the morning of her disappearance wearing his black parka. And he used this coworker's dream to reinforce that idea. Why? This entire case could boil down to a tale of two coats, because there are conflicting accounts of what coat or jacket Sheree had on when she left for work the morning of her disappearance. We'll get into this in more depth later in our story, but keep in mind, knowing what Sheree was wearing could help prove who killed her. Cary's coworker wasn't the only person having psychic experiences involving Sheree Warren. Detective Jack Bell had also received an anonymous letter just days before Cary made his recording for the private investigator. The letter writer had claimed to have special abilities.
I got some information from a psychic, supposedly, with drawings on it.
KSL, the news station I work for, had received a similar letter around the same time.
Yeah, I knew there was one that went to KSL.
Jack should know, because KSL gave its letter to him back in '85. Cary Hartmann knew that too. He described the psychic letter to KSL in his statement to the private investigator.
Jack Bell has in his possession a 4-page letter of a lady that recounts her dreams. Same thing in essence.
The same thing as Cary's coworker's dream.
Said she was in the mountains by Red Rocks.
She saw partying music, laughing entertainment. She saw Sheree coerced out to a truck. Sheree, realizing what had happened, tried to get away, struggled. Her neck was either snapped or strangled. Very gruesome.
Described the pickup with 2 guys in it.
She said this gentleman drove a light-colored Ford 4x4 half-ton, 2 tires mounted in rear bed on either side.
At a truck stop in the mountain.
She saw this man stopping at a convenience store also. He knew the owner of the convenience store, or at least the person working there. Bought a can of Coors, steel-rimmed, mirrored glasses.
There was a female body in the back of the truck. They got rid of it somewhere in the Red Rock area.
This is really hard for me, though. This lady saw a mutilated body tucked underneath an evergreen tree with some fall foliage over it. Cannot be seen from the road. By a boulder, 5 to 4 foot in diameter. Sheree's body, before it was mutilated, was molested in this lady's letter. The worst possible of all things that could happen.
That was basically what I remember of that.
It's funny that two people completely separate of each other would describe this guy as blonde, 220 pounds.
Funny is not the word I would use.
I've been in contact with some astrologers who told me this as of this morning. The lady told me she determined Sheree's body is 22 miles southeast of the last place she was seen, which would put it about Little Cottonwood Canyon.
This was Cary's third separate reference to some form of psychic in this statement.
She sees two men, slightly built, friendly type, not the rough-talking truck stop cowboy type. Business type, business papers. She said in her professional opinion, the lady is not alive.
I don't put any weight on these dreams or psychic stories as evidence, but I do find it interesting Cary described a big guy who was a bit cowboy and a bit businessman rolled into one. Richard Moss, the credit union manager Sheree was training on the day she disappeared, is tall and broad. And because Richard was the last person known to have seen Sheree alive, he was an obvious person of interest for police. We heard in the last episode, Richard's dad owned a livestock auction, but Richard had himself pursued a career in banking. He was a little bit country, a little bit business type. Jack Bell started to wonder if Cary was using the dreams and psychics to try and derail his investigation.
I had started looking at Cary pretty serious, because I was getting all this other stupid crap that, I knew wasn't coming from Chuck, like these psychics and these pictures.
Cary had provided his private investigator with 3 separate psychic stories. All involved 2 male suspects, trauma to the neck or throat of a female victim, and a disposal location in the mountains, possibly near Red Rock Cliffs. The spot Sheree was last seen, as far as anyone knew, was at the credit union office in Salt Lake City. It was just a few blocks from the Toyota dealership where she had planned to meet her estranged husband, Chuck Warren, at the end of her workday.
I'll briefly touch on the Wagstaff Toyota situation. I've been down there 3 times myself with flyers that I printed up. Not one salesman that I've talked to remembers Sheree at all that night.
Cary said one of the first calls he had made after learning Sheree was missing had been to a close friend of his.
His name is Stephen K. Bartlett, special investigator for the district attorney's office.
When Cary says the district attorney's office, he means the Salt Lake County district attorney. Ogden and Roy are in Weber County, not Salt Lake County. Roy Police Detective Jack Bell was leading the search for Sheree, and Cary had leveraged his high school acquaintance with Jack to get inside information about the case. But Sheree had disappeared from Salt Lake City, which gave Salt Lake Police a role in the search, and Cary was blind to what Salt Lake Police were doing. That, presumably, is why he reached out to another of his childhood chums, Steve Bartlett.
I called Steve and said, "Steve, we've got a problem." I said, "Let's get to work on it immediately." I told him the severity of the case. Because of our relationship, Steve knew right off the bat something was wrong.
Cary had fed Steve Bartlett with the story of Sheree's disappearance, emphasizing she had left her work that night, headed to meet her estranged husband at Wagstaff Toyota in Salt Lake City. Cary had urged his old friend to investigate.
Stephen went down there and approached these people on the night shift, asked them the same question. They had not seen Chuck Warren or Sheree Warren anywhere on the premises, or the car, or any appointment, any time that evening.
By contacting Steve Bartlett, Cary had ensured he would be among the first to hear if Salt Lake Police turned up any leads. Just another example of Cary using his friendships to know who investigators were talking to, what those people were saying, and where officers were looking for Sheree Warren. He had manipulated Steve Bartlett, just as he had Detective Jack Bell. Dreams can sometimes seem so vivid we mistake them for reality. They linger as we wake. In those moments between sleep and waking, the content of our subconscious can seem all too real. That's how a woman I'll call Danielle felt as she came awake around 5 a.m. on the morning of March 23, 1986. Danielle's not her real name. I'm using the pseudonym to protect her privacy. In the dream, Danielle felt something rough running over her cheek. Her arms seemed heavy, as if weighted down by cinder blocks. She opened her eyes, unfocused without contact lenses, to the familiar but darkened space of her bedroom. The dream should have ended in that moment, but it didn't, because Danielle had not been dreaming. A dark figure leaned over her, pinning her arms to her sides. A stubbled face pressed against hers, kissing her. "Danielle," the figure said. "Danielle." It had a man's voice, carried on breath that reeked of alcohol and stale cola. "Are you 16, Danielle?" he asked. She didn't answer. "Are you 16? He repeated. "No, I'm 30, she said, confused and terrified. She squinted, trying to make out his face. "Don't look at me. I'll kill you," he said. She began to cry. "Don't make any noise," he said. "I'm a mother. Please don't hurt me," she said. Her young son was not at home, thankfully. He had fallen asleep at his babysitter's, and Danielle hadn't wanted to wake him when she had returned home that evening after a night out with a friend. "Are you scared, honey?" the man asked. Danielle thought she detected a note of excitement in his voice at the idea of her terror. "Yes," she answered. "It's normal for me to be scared." I'm not going to describe what happened next. It's enough to know Danielle had feared for her life. She had believed the man might injure or kill her if she had resisted. Just hurry up and get this over with, she had thought. The entire encounter lasted just minutes. She remained frozen in fear on her bed as the man left. She heard him walk through her kitchen, where he stopped just long enough to steal her purse. Danielle waited until all went quiet. She then grabbed her robe and ran from her home, pounding on a neighbor's door in tears. The neighbor called Ogden City Police. This rape was the 9th in a string of similar unsolved sexual assaults in Ogden dating back over 2 years. In each case, a man had entered a woman's home, uninvited, usually while she slept. This man had broken into Danielle's home by prying out a window screen.
It seems like they would check windows and doors.
Shane Miner was at that time a detective for the Ogden City Police Department.
If a window wasn't locked, pull the screen off, open the window, pry the window open.
Shane told me the rash of rapes in Ogden had overwhelmed the lone detective assigned to handle sex crimes in the city.
So then it started going out to others in the detective division was working those cases as well.
That's how Shane Miner was drawn into the search for a man some were calling the Ogden City Rapist.
They were quite active at night and out and about in the city.
The string of 10 or so attacks had not gone unnoticed by the press.
They would occur throughout the whole city of Ogden. It wasn't a specific area.
The Ogden Standard-Examiner, an afternoon newspaper serving the city and its suburbs, began reporting on the cases. Readers, women especially, were urged to lock their doors at night, to not go out after dark alone.
These would happen between 11:30 midnight and 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning.
The idea of a serial rapist stalking the darkened streets put the entire community on edge. People were calling Ogden police with tips almost daily.
Where somebody would be spotted outside of a house. It wasn't necessarily a burglary or break-in.
But catching the rapist in the act had so far proved impossible.
I remember a period of time to where you'd get the case in the morning for follow-up, and it got to be we were getting hit regularly enough. We would work double shifts and go out of the city at night and stake the city out to see if they're going to hit again.
One of the Ogden City rapist attacks had occurred just weeks after Sheree Warren disappeared, in October of '85. A couple more happened 6 months later, in March of '86. 2 more attacks came in May, followed by another in June. In one of those cases, a man entered the home of a woman whom I'll call Caroline. Again, that's not her real name. Caroline had fallen asleep on her couch, watching an old war movie on TV. She had started awake around 3:30 a.m. to the sound of a click and the TV going dark. She had sat up. The shadowed figure of a man stood next to the TV. He had darted across the room and grabbed her by the arms before she could get off the couch. "I know you have 2 boys and what room they're in," the man had said. "Don't piss around. I do have a gun." For a moment, Caroline thought she was being pranked. She called the man by the name Ben, telling him it wasn't funny and to stop screwing around. He said his name wasn't Ben. He had been watching her and knew she was alone. He asked how old she was. Caroline reacted in a jolt of panic, trying to twist herself free. "You'll wake the kids," he said. "I'll blow their heads off." And so she stopped fighting. I'm not going to detail the further facts of this assault either, but they were largely similar in style and sequence to what the other woman I mentioned, Danielle, had experienced. When it was over, the man instructed Caroline not to tell anyone what he had done. He said he knew her and her husband. Caroline had been separated for a few years and would return to kill them if she reported having been raped. She did it anyway, calling police from a neighbor's home after the man exited. She told an officer the rapist had worn a thick coat, like a ski parka or military fatigue jacket. She hadn't heard a car as he had left. That morning, detectives found a boot print in a flower bed outside Caroline's front window.
And so then we started checking out a lot of those areas where we had reported sexual assaults or break-in type of rapes and seen the same shoe print. So that kind of gave us one lead.
Detectives believed the man had seen Caroline asleep on her couch while window peeping. He appeared to have entered her house through an unlocked back door. Caroline went through a medical exam that morning, what's often called a rape kit. But a few days later, she skipped a follow-up appointment with police. A detective called to ask why. According to a report, Caroline said she no longer wanted to pursue the case.
My experience was you can't push them into it, and you got to give them room.
Shane Miner told me he encountered this kind of reluctance from victims of rape and sexual assault often in his career.
Yeah, and it's like you're re-victimizing them by having them go through it again, or as many times as they have to keep going through it, especially when it goes to court. I think a lot of people pick up on that. They see that. They just don't want to go there.
The Ogden detectives did their best to build trust with the various women. They believed each might have important information that could help unmask the rapist's identity. But they could only get that information by asking tough questions.
They've just been traumatized, so how do they know what's important? They kind of can give you the real basics, but sometimes you need more than that to find out what your evidence is.
The detectives had to be direct, but also empathetic. The women had to show great courage. The rapist's threats carried weight, because the newspaper had recently told the story of a South Ogden woman named Joyce Yost, who had been sexually assaulted, reported it to police, and then disappeared. As the Ogden City rapist investigation was ramping up in 1986, police elsewhere in Utah were beginning the hunt for a suspected serial killer.
There are a lot of missing girls, both inside and outside of Utah, where it appears there might be foul play suspected.
A string of unsolved and, on the surface, unconnected murders of young women had plagued the northern part of the state during the mid-'80s, evoking memories of serial killer Ted Bundy.
Bundy still owes Utah 10 years for kidnapping.
Bundy was by this time in '86 firmly in custody, fighting to forestall his scheduled execution in the state of Florida.
Bundy has repeatedly claimed his innocence, and his trip to the electric chair, if it comes at all, may be years away.
So Bundy couldn't be responsible for these murders, which all took place after his incarceration. One of the most egregious had taken place on the streets of Salt Lake City, where in May of '85, someone killed a 15-year-old girl named Christine Gallegos.
Leah Gallegos does not get emotional when she tells of what happened to her daughter here.
That she was beaten badly, stabbed until the knife broke and they couldn't stab her anymore, and then shot twice in the head.
Coroners recovered the bullets. They were .38 caliber rounds, the type used in many police revolvers. Just shy of a year later, a 20-year-old woman starting a new job as a 7-Eleven clerk died a similar death. It happened in the suburb of Layton, Utah, partway between Salt Lake and Ogden.
Carla Maxwell's body was discovered by a regular customer looking for his morning cup of coffee around 3:45. He found the victim behind the sales counter, shot 5 times in the head and chest. Layton's police chief says the physical evidence is slim and won't speculate over a motive. He does say the murder weapon was probably a .38 caliber revolver.
The killer didn't steal anything from the store. The only item missing was Carla's purse, which police believed the killer had taken as a trophy.
2 communities are feeling the impact of this killing, Layton and Ogden, where Maxwell lived and went to school.
A few weeks later, people living in a residential neighborhood of Salt Lake City heard a burst of gunfire late at night. They came outside to find a woman named Lisa Strong dead on the sidewalk.
As we came down, we looked across the road and we seen the body of the lady across the road over there. So as soon as we went over and we saw she was dead, then we came back in the house and dialed 911 to call the police.
Strong was a 25-year-old artist and model who had grown up in Ogden. She had been walking home from work a bit after midnight when a man had accosted her. She had tried to run, but the attacker had shot and killed her for no apparent reason. Police recovered one of the slugs. It was a .38. So the crime lab had bullets from all 3 killings. Ballistic analysis showed a single gun had fired them all.
The Salt Lake police now say the Gallegos killing is tied to 2 others, the murders of Carla Maxwell of Layton and Lisa Strong in Salt Lake City.
Salt Lake police wondered if a Ted Bundy-style killer had once again found fertile hunting ground in their community. They formed a task force in June of '86 in the hopes of capturing the killer. Christine Gallegos' mom told TV station KSL she felt frustrated.
Leah Gallegos says it's unfortunate it took the murders of 2 more women before a task force was formed.
Well, they haven't forgot her. I wouldn't allow that. Because that guy needs to be stopped. He really needs to be stopped. How many more, 2 Ted Bundys?
But Salt Lake Police Captain O.J. Peck didn't just limit his team to the 3 killings they had linked by ballistics. He sent out a letter to police agencies in states all across the West, saying they were, quote, keenly interested in any unsolved homicides involving female victims. They were looking for a Smith & Wesson or Ruger .38 or .357 caliber handgun because a .357 can also fire .38 caliber rounds. Captain Peck told the press they would examine any unsolved disappearances of women across the region.
And we're looking at those at great length.
The task force put together a list of names. They included some that should sound familiar to listeners of this podcast, like Joyce Yost, Teresa Greaves, and Sheree Warren. 2 of the Salt Lake murders had taken place less than 2 miles from the credit union office where Sheree had last been seen, which raised the question, could Sheree have died at the hands of a serial killer? The task force intended to find out. Salt Lake City Police invited Roy City Detective Jack Bell, the lead investigator on the Sheree Warren case, to contribute to their task force. But Salt Lake would run the show. Jack had no problem sitting on the sidelines. He didn't think a serial killer had murdered Sheree. By that point, in the summer of '86, Jack's focus had shifted from Sheree's husband, Chuck Warren, to her boyfriend, Cary Hartmann.
Cary seemed to do everything he could to make Chuck look guilty of Sheree's disappearance. Must admit he did a pretty good job for a while.
Cary had been in Jack's ear since the day after Sheree's disappearance, repeating any rumor that seemed to cast Chuck Warren in a negative light. Jack told me some of it had borne out, like the claim Chuck had nearly killed his first wife Alice when they had split. Chuck had allegedly beat Alice with a tire iron.
I wish he hadn't looked so guilty to start with, but he did.
Gradually, though, Jack had come to believe Cary was manipulating him, leaning on the fact they had known each other in high school. A bit earlier, Jack mentioned having received a letter from an anonymous psychic. It had described a woman being killed near a truck stop in the mountains. The writer had described Red Rock Cliffs.
My personal thinking was all of these psychic stuff and all of these pictures were coming from Cary. At that time, I thought he, for some reason, would like her to be found and not pinpointed to him, whether it was for her parents or who it was for.
Jack told me he had given the psychic letter to Ogden police for forensic analysis, but never got it back.
Whether it went to the FBI, I don't know. I don't know.
And again, news station KSL had also received a similar psychic letter. KSL had turned its letter over to Jack, who in turn gave it to the Salt Lake City Task Force, along with a sample of Cary Hartmann's handwriting for comparison.
Now, have you been able to find that?
I tried to chase down both of these letters by pestering sources and by filing a series of public records requests. Ogden City couldn't find anything related to Jack Bell's psychic letter. Salt Lake City police, on the other hand, did find a copy of the KSL psychic letter. It had been missing from the Sheree Warren case file for 35 years. The letter includes hand-drawn sketches. The first is of a woman from the shoulders up. Next to her are the words, reddish hair, beautiful young mother, and maroon import, an apparent reference to Sheree's car. Another page includes a drawing of a pine tree with the words, through body over ledge, body rolled well under a large evergreen, body is not able to be seen. I'm no handwriting expert, but I've seen a fair amount of Cary Hartmann's writings. He tended to use block capitals or lowercase cursive. The psychic letter uses neither. Cary dots his I's with circles. The psychic letter writer doesn't. So, if the information in the psychic letter originated with Cary, it's likely someone else did the actual writing. My personal thanks to Salt Lake City Records Officer Candy Allred for digging deep and finding the missing letter. I can't stress enough how important records are when looking into a case this old, because memories fade with time.
Yeah, it's been so long ago, Dave. You're helping stir this old brain up a little bit, so.
So let me tell you about another paper record in the Sheree Warren case. It's a report private investigator Michael Neumeier wrote up and gave to Detective Jack Bell. Neumeier listed Chuck Warren as his top suspect, along with one of Chuck's coworkers and a repo man who had worked at the same credit union as Sheree. Neumeier did not include Cary Hartmann as a suspect. In Neumeier's eyes, Cary was simply Sheree's boyfriend.
Yeah, that sounds like Neumeier.
But here's what's most interesting to me. Neumeier wrote Sheree was last seen wearing a black John White's casual craft jacket size 42. He went into detail, describing it as waist length with nylon lining, a zip collar, and snap-down front. That's a men's coat, not the type of business attire Sheree would have worn to the office. It would have absolutely swamped her. A 42-inch chest on a woman who stood just 5'5" and weighed 115 pounds would have looked ridiculous. Richard Moss, the last person known to have seen Sheree alive, never mentioned Sheree wearing a black men's coat. Even if he had, I doubt he would have known the exact make and size. No, that detail could have only come from Cary Hartmann. Private investigator Michael Neumeier was describing Cary's coat. Yet another indication Cary wanted, even needed, people to think Sheree disappeared while wearing his black parka. Former Detective Jack Bell told me Michael Neumeier's report skewed in Cary's favor, which isn't surprising considering where Neumeier got most of his information.
Cary hired him, and Cary gave him a pretty lengthy statement.
If you haven't picked up on it yet, I'll just tell you, Jack didn't have much respect for Michael Neumeier, probably because of what his report concluded. Hang with me here, because this is going to get complicated. Neumeier had seen a story in the Salt Lake Tribune, which quoted the mother of the first Salt Lake City shooting victim, Christine Gallegos. Leah Gallegos said she had learned her daughter had told a convenience store clerk the night of her death she was going undercover to investigate the murder of a friend of hers named Philip Kirby. Kirby had vanished in October of '84. His body surfaced in May of '85, days before Christine Gallegos' murder, uncovered by the most unlikely of means.
A pig this morning escaped from its pen at an LDS steak farm east of Oakley. The caretaker found her rooting in a pile of rocks. Summit County Sheriff's deputies were called to the scene. They found a body under the rocks. Detective Robert Barry suspects murder. He said it's not likely someone would crawl under 3 feet of rock and die.
Detectives quickly pieced together what had happened. They identified the remains as Kirby's and arrested the caretaker's brother, John Monson, on suspicion of murder.
Sergeant Robert Barry says the dead man and the suspect were formerly co-workers at a Salt Lake auto dealership parts department.
We believe that the two individuals were involved in some type of a theft ring in Salt Lake.
Kirby and Monson had worked for Wagstaff Toyota, the same dealership where Sheree was supposed to meet her estranged husband on the afternoon of her disappearance.
Officials suspect the two were using the church farm as a hiding place for stolen property.
The pair had been billing auto parts to the dealership, selling them on the side, and pocketing the profit. But Kirby had developed cold feet and wanted out. Monson would later admit to killing Kirby to keep him from squealing. Again, Christine Gallegos' death had come just 10 days after the discovery of Philip Kirby's remains. Her mom, Leah Gallegos, came to believe her daughter might have uncovered more about the Wagstaff Toyota theft ring and gotten herself killed in the process. Cary Hartmann's private investigator, Michael Neumeier, adopted this theory as his own, replacing Sheree Warren for Christine Gallegos. Maybe, Neumeier suggested, Sheree had stumbled into a criminal conspiracy she wasn't supposed to know about. I asked Jack Bell if the theory had registered with him at the time.
No, it didn't register. Neumeier didn't register with me. I mean, he registered with me, but he's a flake.
Michael Neumeier is no longer alive. I am unable to confirm whether he was or was not a flake. But his report did little to assist in the search for Sheree.
It was basically Cary trying to cover his tracks a little bit, and he picked a good one to go to.
There's a place on the campus of Weber State University on the east side of Ogden where if you have the right set of keys you can unlock a door that takes you into the gray underbelly of a building called the Swenson Gymnasium. You duck your head under pipes that run along the ceiling. You walk back to a space where the guts of the gym's swimming pool hide. The pumps, drains, and pipes hiss and grumble, doing endless work rarely witnessed by anyone. It's an unconventional place to record sound for a podcast, but I've brought you down here to meet a woman named Jamie Schmaltz.
I should probably tell you how I realized who Cary Hartmann was.
Jamie had spent her early 20s working as a hostess and cocktail waitress at a hotel bar in Ogden called the Electric Alley. It was one of Cary Hartmann's haunts.
I was standing there one night and he walked up to me, and I don't remember what he said, but I remember looking at him, and then I think he asked me my name, and I kept looking at him and I was like, I know this guy from somewhere. He looks really familiar. And so finally it dawned on me. I was like, you know my mom, because my mom was a hairdresser. So come to find out, she cut his hair.
Jamie told me Cary had tried to flirt with her.
But I didn't really pay attention to that stuff. I mean, I was there to do my job, you know.
Sometime later, she mentioned having run into Cary to her mom.
I remember her saying something like, just be careful with him. And I was like, okay, but I didn't really think much of it. And he seemed like an okay guy.
A few years went by. Jamie quit her job at the Electric Alley and went to school, enrolling at Weber State College.
And one day I'm walking to my class, and there appears Cary Hartmann. And he walks up to me and he starts talking to me. And I don't remember, because it's been 30 plus years. But he says, hey, did you know that there's a window in the swimming pool at the aquatic center? And I was like, what do you mean? And he was like, well, there's a window. You can see people swimming.
This was true. It's not there anymore, but the gym's swimming pool did once have a viewing window below the water level. I'm not sure what it was for. Whatever the reason, access to the window was buried in the bowels of the building. Not just anyone could get down there. I've mentioned this before, but now it's relevant to repeat. Cary worked for the college, running the steam boilers and maintaining the pipes that snaked through tunnels all beneath campus. He had the keys. Cary asked Jamie to come with him to see the swimming pool window.
And I was like, okay.
They headed over to the gym. Cary opened that locked door and ushered Jamie inside.
And so we go in there, and it's underground in this basement, and we had to walk clear in the very back. It was just him and I. And we walk all the way in the very back, and then there's this window. And he's like, see, anybody could watch you at any time. And they could see what you're doing in the swimming pool. And I was like, okay. I didn't really, I don't know if I was supposed to have a certain reaction, but I just thought it was kind of strange. And I think I may have said, that's kind of creepy.
Jamie couldn't tell me why she'd agreed to go with Cary, alone, to this secluded spot. She thought maybe he had said something about being a cop. She couldn't remember. Jamie admits she had been naive then, and hadn't questioned Cary's motives the way she does now.
What was the purpose of taking me down there and showing me the window? Did he get off on that somehow?
Jamie told me Cary didn't try anything that day under the pool. She thinks she knows why.
If he tried to do anything, once I got away, I know him.
Once I got away. That presumes a lot. If Jamie had screamed, no one would have heard her over the noise. But clearly, that's not what happened. She walked back out into the sunlight, perfectly safe. Looking back now, she's not sure how.
He got something out of it, me agreeing to go there.
While researching what Jamie told me, I came across an article from May of '86 in the archives of Weber State's student newspaper, The Signpost. It said campus police had received reports from several women who had come out of the shower at the gym and found a man sitting in the women's locker room, watching them. It went on to say, quote, police believe this is the same man who watches swimmers in the Swenson Gym pool from a window below water level. Police Chief Lee Cassidy said the man is thought to masturbate while watching the swimmers. I couldn't find any follow-up stories about this swimming pool voyeur, so I don't know if he was ever identified or arrested.
And then I'm at home one night, and I get this phone call. And this man says, hi, I'm doing a survey on ladies' lingerie and women's apparel. Can you help me out here? And in my mind, I know I had had that phone call before, and I hung up. And so I thought, I hung up on him before, okay, I'll do it this time. So he just starts asking me questions, and he said, okay, so we're going to talk about ladies' underwear. Do you like briefs, thong, or bikinis? What do you wear? And so I was like, well, it depends on what I'm wearing. And he was like, well, what do you sleep in? I tell him, and he's like, okay. And he started asking me other questions like, what kind of nylons did I like? And I don't remember the other questions until he said, why don't you tell me what your breasts are like? Are they firm, not so firm, or saggy? And I was like, that's a little personal, don't you think? And he just had this comeback, like, on it, quick. And so it seemed legit, so I answered him. And then he said, well, what about your areola? Is it the size of like a dime, size of a nickel, or size of a quarter? And I said, what the hell does that have to do with ladies' lingerie? And he was just like, we like to find out what women like. And then, like I said, I got really quiet because I thought, is he masturbating? But I never heard anything. So a little bit later in the conversation, all of a sudden I realized, this sounds like Cary Hartmann. And I think I may have even said to him, "Your voice sounds familiar." But I don't remember what he said.
Jamie had had enough. She hung up on the man.
After I hung up the phone, I felt like I just got goosebumps. I was really uncomfortable. I was scared.
But also angry. She picked up her phone book, looked up Cary Hartmann's name, and dialed his number. His line was busy. Jamie had forgotten this detail when we spoke, but I refreshed her memory by showing her a report written by an Ogden police detective named Chris Zimmerman.
I did that. Now that he says that, I did that. I can't believe I forgot that. Mm-hmm. That's right. Oh my God. It's like, you're not going to get me. Sorry, but you know what I mean?
We've met Zimmerman before. He was the Ogden detective who had issued a prank parking ticket to President Ronald Reagan's limousine. Jamie told me she had first met Zimmerman after a man had groped her on campus, sometime before this whole encounter with Cary Hartmann. Zimmerman had walked her through filing a report in that case.
Because Chris had given me his card and he was a detective for Ogden City, I felt comfortable enough, so I called him and I was like, "I hope you don't think I'm weird." I said, "But I swear to God, I just got an obscene phone call from Cary Hartmann." And he was like, "Really?" And I said, "Yeah, like I'm positive."
Zimmerman was among the detectives working the Ogden City rapist investigation. The rapist had struck again just days before. In that case, a woman had described waking around 3 a.m. to the sound of noise in her living room. She had gone to investigate and found a strange man there. He had come in through a window. She had tried to fight to push him out of the house. "Make it easy for me," he had said. "I have a gun. If you don't cooperate, I'll hurt you and your baby." She had stopped fighting, but warned the man her husband might come home soon. He had told her that was a lie. He knew she was divorced or separated. "I've been watching you for quite a while," he had said. "I know where you shop. I know where you work. I know who your parents are." He had forced her back into her bedroom. She had noted an odor. He smelled greasy, as if he had been working around a machine or engine of some kind. She had asked the man who he was. He had replied he was a cop, would know if she called the police, and would come back to kill her and her baby if she did. He gave her advice on how to better secure her windows and doors, told her not to worry because she wouldn't get pregnant, then, as he was leaving, offered to send her money in the mail. Zimmerman, the detective, had gone on the news the next day and described this modus operandi.
The only thing that we can come up with on that is there is a possibility that he follows the women around town, gets to know them, gets to know information about them, and then hits them.
Jamie Schmaltz had seen Detective Zimmerman on TV talking about the rape cases. She told him on the phone she felt afraid because she fit the profile of the rape victims, single, in her 20s, with a child.
And so he's like, "Okay, well, are you safe? Like, lock your door, blah, 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 blah."
She asked if there was a connection between the rapist and Cary Hartmann's lingerie survey phone call. Could the call be a prelude to an attack?
He knew he was calling me. There's no doubt in my mind.
Zimmerman assured her there was no connection that he knew of. That was about to change. The Ogden City rapist attacked yet another woman on October 20th, 1986. The assault had many of the same hallmarks. The man entered the woman's home as she slept, told her he was a police officer, claimed to have but didn't show a gun, and threatened to kill the woman and her children if she didn't cooperate. Ogden Police Detective Shane Miner and his colleagues had been trying for months to find a common thread.
There was a couple different lists we had going of date, time of occurrence, and the location. Started to compile those, and then looking at the MO on how the person got in, kind of different things that happened once they were inside, and trying to get some gist of if we're dealing with the same person or if we're dealing with more than one person.
Their lists included these commonalities. The victims were all single or separated with small children. The attacker used a, quote, minimum amount of force. He sometimes smelled of grease often stole purses, and would occasionally mention police department connections. The detectives also saw similarities in the specifics of the sex acts.
The telephone calls came up. There was a rash of those. We didn't know if those were the same, if that person played into the break-in rapes that had been going on.
That changed when Detective Chris Zimmerman received a tip at the end of October. He wrote a report about it, but kept the woman anonymous. Even today, I don't know her identity. The woman told Zimmerman she believed Cary Hartmann could be the Ogden City rapist. She had personal knowledge that Cary had for years made obscene lingerie survey phone calls. She also said Cary lived just up the street from where one of the rapes had occurred. Zimmerman started digging. He knew Cary had been in the Ogden Police Reserve.
In speaking with officers about Hartmann, they stated he liked to show his badge and tell people he was a cop.
That comes from a report Zimmerman later filed in the case. Zimmerman declined my request for an interview, so you're hearing his words read by a voice actor.
Due to the fact that Hartmann was a friend to some officers, this was kept as quiet as possible, and it was decided no supplementary reports would be written until absolutely needed. All records were kept by me in note form.
Zimmerman learned of Cary's 1971 arrest for making harassing telephone calls to Heidi Posnine.
He says, "Hi," I can't remember exactly.
Hartmann started the call with a lingerie survey.
He read of how Cary had tried to lure Heidi up the canyon to a campground near Causey Reservoir,
using a threat of bodily harm to her husband.
He would say, if I try to call anybody, then it wouldn't be healthy for my husband because he'd do something to the Mustang.
Heidi had shown Cary mercy after his arrest in the canyon. She had just wanted him to get some help. But that hadn't happened.
He was probably just a sick puppy.
Zimmerman was aware of Cary's connection to Sheree Warren, so he called Roy City Police Detective Jack Bell. They began to look at the whole arc of Cary's behavior and saw a clear escalation from that encounter with Heidi in 1971 to where they then stood 15 years later.
Everything escalates.
Yeah.
You're right.
They talked about how the rapist had sometimes claimed to be a cop.
Some reserves got a little badge happy and thought they were real policemen.
Zimmerman wrote Cary had been booted from the reserve after flashing his badge to get out of a ticket.
That will definitely get you bounced out.
This differed from the official account that Cary had resigned because he had taken a job out of state. It seems likely that had been a convenient excuse, a way of getting Cary out of the reserve without unnecessary embarrassment. Zimmerman spent several days contacting each of the rape victims again, asking if any had received lingerie survey phone calls before the attacks. Several had. One told him not only had she received the call, she had also been at the Weber State Gym, where she taught gymnastics, hours before being attacked at her home. Zimmerman found other links between Cary and some of the women. One recognized Cary's photo because he was friends with her husband. Another was a family friend to the Hartmanns. Yet another lived in the same apartment complex as one of Cary's former girlfriends.
Zim had connected Hartmann to 4 victims.
Former Ogden police detective Shane Miner told me that represented only about a quarter of the rapes on the detectives' lists. They needed stronger evidence, so Zimmerman took his findings to the Weber County attorney. He asked the state court for permission to put what's known as a pen register on Cary's phone. It would record the number of every outgoing call. The pen register became active toward the end of November 1986. Over the next 5 weeks, it logged more than 1,900 outgoing calls from Cary's phone.
These were placed on a computer printout. Approximately 200 of the calls were to friends or acquaintances.
These are Zimmerman's words from a report read by a voice actor.
The others were picked at random, going through the phone book and picking last names with girls' first names or first name listed as initials only. I did contact several of the people called, and they had received the lingerie survey.
Zimmerman noticed one number appeared multiple times. He called it, and a woman answered. He explained who he was and asked if she had received a lingerie survey call. She said no, but she knew who made them. Zimmerman had inadvertently called Cary's second wife, Becky. I shared a bit of her story with you in episode 1. Zimmerman's notes say Becky recalled Cary making obscene phone calls to random women while they were married. She mentioned Cary had had a vasectomy. This caught Zimmerman's attention because it potentially explained why the rapist had told one of the women not to worry about getting pregnant. Becky said Cary had been infatuated with guns and owned both .357 and .38 caliber revolvers. Guns capable of firing the rounds used in the 3 unsolved murders under investigation by the Salt Lake City Task Force. And Becky's new husband told Zimmerman Cary was infatuated with Ted Bundy.
It started out in Utah, and it seemed like one set of circumstances seemed to bootstrap another.
That's Bundy's voice in a phone call to a reporter in 1979, denying he had ever killed anyone. Becky's husband told Detective Zimmerman Cary had even made his sons sit and watch a TV special about Bundy. I can't say for sure, but based on the time frame, it's possible that show was a made-for-TV movie called The Deliberate Stranger.
Ted Bundy is being played by St. Elsewhere star Mark Harmon.
There's a whole lot of psychiatrists in this country who are still trying to figure out what makes him tick, too. It's a complex person, you know?
Ogden police began to suspect the Ogden City rapist might also have studied the work of Ted Bundy.
Police officers, they want to solve crimes, and sometimes I don't think they really try to think things through. They're willing to take the convenient alternative, and the convenient alternative is me.
Earlier in this episode, I told you about a woman I'm calling Danielle. She was among the many women whom the Ogden City rapist had attacked. Ogden police had closed her case without an arrest due to a lack of leads. But Detective Chris Zimmerman reestablished contact with Danielle again in November of '86, about half a year following her assault. She told him she had put it out of her mind and tried to move on with her life. Zimmerman told Danielle he needed her help. He showed her a spread of 6 pictures of men's faces. Cary Hartmann's picture sat among them. Danielle couldn't pinpoint her attacker from those photos. It had been too dark. She hadn't been able to see well without her contacts. And he had told her not to look at him. She just couldn't be certain what he looked like. "I've seen one of them before," she had said, "but it's nothing." Zimmerman asked her to explain. Any little thing could help.
She stated that she was a barber and she had gone to Bob's sewing machine a few weeks prior to her attack to have her scissors sharpened.
This again comes from a report Detective Chris Zimmerman wrote.
In the store, there was a white male working there and another white male standing there talking to him. The person who was standing there was the person in the picture she had picked. This was Cary Hartmann.
Bob's sewing machine was the shop where Cary's friend and fellow former Ogden Police Reserve officer Dave Moore worked.
There was discussion about whether she was single or married, where she cut hair, and other personal information. She gave her name and address to them for the scissors receipt. Hartmann was standing right there when she gave the address and name.
The man who had broken into Danielle's home had awoken her by whispering her name into her ear.
She couldn't identify the suspect by picture, but she was sure if she heard his voice again, she would know him because his voice was very distinctive.
Cary Hartmann had started a new job in the summer of '86, a few months after the attack on Danielle. He still worked for Weber State College during the day, but now tended bar at night at a place called the Galleon. Danielle and a friend went to the Galleon one night in March of '87, just shy of a year on from the night of her rape. As they sat and socialized, sipping their drinks, a man came on the intercom. It was the bartender. A jolt shot through Danielle. She recognized the voice. It was the same as the man who had raped her, Cary Hartmann. On the next episode of Cold.
I'd never heard Sheree upset before. She was saying things like, "How could you be with someone else?"
I'm reporting a body that I found.
How come nobody knows that voice? I don't understand.
If you have information about the disappearance of Sheree Warren, now is the time to share it. You can reach me by emailing cold@ksl.com or contact the Roy City Police Department at 801-774-1063. I also want you to know, if you've experienced abuse or sexual violence, you're not alone. There are trained experts ready to listen and help. In the United States, survivors of rape and sexual assault can connect to free resources through the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network at rainn.org. If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic abuse in any form, you can reach the National Domestic Violence Hotline at thehotline.org. Cold is a production of KSL Podcasts and Wondery in association with Workhouse Media. Cold is researched, written, and hosted by me, Dave Cawley. Audio production and sound design by Ben Kiebrick and Aaron Mason. Mixing and mastering by Ben Kiebrick. Michael Bonmiller composed our main theme, with additional music this season by Allison Leighton Brown. Additional voices in this episode provided by
John Green
and
Kevin LaRue.
My personal thanks to our editorial team, Amy Donaldson, Andrea Smarden, Ryan Meeks, Becky Bruce, Kira Faramond, Kellyanne Halverson, Josh Tilton, and Felix Bennell. For Amazon Music and Wondery, managing producer Candice Manriquez-Wren, producer Claire Chambers, senior producer Lizzie Bassett, and executive producer Morgan Jones. Special thanks to Cale Bittner and Allison Vermeulen. With Workhouse Media executive producers Paul Anderson and Nick Piniella. And for KSL Podcasts, executive producer Cheryl Worsley. For pictures and more, go to our website, thecoldpodcast.com, and follow us on social at The Cold Podcast. Most of all, thank you for listening.
Hey, I'm Cassie DePeckle, the host of Wondery's podcast, Against the Odds. In our next season, it's 1965. And amid escalating Cold War tensions, the CIA joins forces with India's Intelligence Bureau to spy on China's nuclear weapons program. Together, they come up with an audacious plan: place a spying device atop one of India's highest and deadliest mountains. A group of expert Indian and American climbers must scale the 25,000-foot peak of Nanda Devi and set up the nuclear-powered device before winter descends. But when the device goes missing, their mission becomes even more fraught with danger. Follow Against the Odds wherever you get your podcasts. You can listen ad-free on the Amazon Music or Wondery app.